All right, good afternoon. Before we do our regular briefing, we will start with a briefing by Martin Griffiths, the Emergency Relief Coordinator, and as you know, the Undersecretary General and head of the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, who's been to Ukraine and Afghanistan and probably other places, and Moscow, of course, in Russia, and Geneva. All right. So I will give Martin the floor, and then we'll take some questions. Thank you. Yeah, it's on.
Thanks a lot. Thanks very much, Stefan. Thank you very much. Yes, I had the privilege of going on after a visit to Afghanistan to go on to Moscow and to Kyiv in Ukraine. As you probably remember, the Secretary General had instructed me a couple of weeks ago to look into the possibilities for humanitarian ceasefires in Ukraine as an addition to the efforts that our team is already making. So I had those two places. Went in from Poland with the help also of the Polish authorities. So if I could speak to those visits. The aim of both the visits, both in Moscow and in Kyiv, was to make sure that the authorities, the Russian Federation authorities and the Ukrainian authorities, were aware of our aspirations, if you like, for humanitarian ceasefires. The ceasefire is often a word that is not recommended. Humanitarian pauses, truces, ceasefires, humanitarian ceasefires. Ideally, one that covers the whole country, of course, but failing that, one that could be brought into being limited in time and place. And this is not the only country, of course, that we've had these efforts. I spent some time in Yemen trying on similar things. So that was my first assignment. The second part of the assignment in both places was to discuss with them possible ways in which we might improve what we call our humanitarian notification system. This is the basis upon which there are safe passage movements, corridors, convoys in Ukraine, either corridors into places which are encircled to provide humanitarian supplies and workers going in, or under ICRC leadership, convoys bringing safe evacuation of people coming out. And I wanted to talk about how we could improve the rate of success of those arrangements, and a particular concept that I put to both of them. In Moscow, I met Foreign Minister Lavrov and his deputy Sergei Vershinin, and also Deputy Defense Minister Fomin, Alexander Fomin, and his senior military officials. In Kyiv, I met the Prime Minister, the two deputy Prime Ministers, the Minister of Defense, and the Deputy Foreign Minister, the Foreign Minister being out of town at that time. I was very glad to go to Kyiv, and the UN office reopened in Kyiv a couple of days after that visit. And the crisis coordinator, Amin Awad, is there, engaged daily, of course, in relations with the government, who themselves restarted their government premises in Kyiv in that same period, and called on diplomatic missions equally to return. Obviously, we have not yet got humanitarian ceasefires in place. On the Russian side, I went into a lot of detail on this, and they continue to promise to get back to me on the details of those proposals. In particular, I also asked both to agree to an arrangement whereby the two parties, the Russian Federation and the Ukrainian authorities, would meet, convened by the UN, to discuss on a virtual or actual basis at any time to discuss humanitarian issues, specifically related to humanitarian issues. Maybe ceasefire monitoring, maybe safe passage, maybe corridors, maybe humanitarian priorities. And I will be going to Turkey this week to meet President Erdogan, who, as you know, the Secretary General spoke to him yesterday, to follow up on some of these ideas. And I was able to have some very useful conversations in those visits with Turkish officials and their senior officials involved in support to the peace talks, peace process. Thank you very much. I'm sorry. In Ukraine, it was very welcome meetings with their leaderships. They agreed to most of the proposals we are making. We have yet to get the same response from the Russian Federation. They agreed to the idea of this common, what we're calling a humanitarian contact group, what I've just been describing. They agreed to the idea of ceasefires, and we have been, but local ones, depending on the circumstance. We're very keen to see progress on Kherson. We discussed Mariupol a great deal in both places, and I suggested that if there is any chance to improve safe evacuation of civilians in Mariupol, you can't do it on a day-by-day basis. We know this from everywhere in the world. We try to do these things. You need at least a 3-day window to enable proper safe evacuation things to happen. As yet, we have not got agreement on that from the Russian side. I'm happy to talk about those issues. We also talked quite a lot with the Prime Minister about the fact that people are coming back. I went to Bucha and Irpin on my way into Kyiv and saw the terrible things that we've all seen on the screen in those two places of such great suffering. One of the aspects of the humanitarian consequences of that is to be prepared to build back those places so that the people who have fled from them will be able to go back. The mayor of Irpin, for example, I asked him, how long will it take to get this extraordinary level of damage which has been done to the civilian infrastructure in Irpin, blocks of flats which have been brought to the earth. How long will it take to get this place ready for rehabilitation, if you like? He said 1.5 years. We cannot allow that to be so long. ICRC, even since that visit to Irpin, has been in there repairing the water supply systems that were also smashed up by the battle for Irpin. And of course, in Bucha, I was able to see couple of those mass graves, which we've all seen and wondered at the horror of. So I think I'll stop there, and happy to take one question.
Nice try. First question, Ibtisam Azam.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Mr. Griffiths. On behalf of the United Nations Correspondent Association, thank you for the briefing. My name is Ibtisam Azam from Al Arabi Al Jadid newspaper. I have a short follow-up on the negotiations or the meetings you had with the Russians and the Ukrainians regarding humanitarian ceasefire. So what is if you could go a little bit more in details about what the Russians don't want or what you heard from them beside that they are going to come back to you. And then on the issue of more people coming back to Ukraine, which challenges does this bring to you regarding humanitarian aid and assistance? Thank you.
On the Russian response, the Russians continue. We have a cell in Moscow, and we have done, as you know, for some time. I think I've spoken about it in this room before. And they continue daily, and my colleagues continue daily, to plan for convoys to move. And we've had a number of successful movements of convoys, but completely inadequate in terms of the overall requirement. And we have a system of humanitarian notification. We notify the Russians, we notify the Ukrainians, and if they don't come back and say, no, it's too dangerous, we go. We do the movement. So there was a lot of discussion about that. I think I think it would be fair to say that right now, if I could speak for the Russian authorities, they are not putting local ceasefires at the top of their agenda, not yet. Look, I've spent years of my life negotiating ceasefires, as you know. I know this is not a simple matter. Even a local ceasefire is not a simple matter to negotiate. And neither I nor the Secretary General, if I could speak for him, had any illusions about whether there would be some sort of immediate breakthrough in this. What I wanted to do was to set out for both parties, first of all, what our vision of a local ceasefire would be. How would it be monitored, for example? That's crucial, as you know, and we've done a lot of work on that. And how ready we are to step forward as soon as there's an opportunity. We have presented to both sides some concepts, one on Kherson that I mentioned earlier, But I guess the time is not quite ripe yet. Maybe there will be some ripeness when we go into the Easter weekend, which is coming, as you know. The Orthodox Easter will be this coming weekend. But more importantly, I'm hoping that we will be ready, first of all, to grab any opportunity that comes. This is beyond safe passage movements. Any that comes that will enable us to grab an opportunity to stop the fighting in a certain time and place. Secondly, that we would have the two parties together in an arrangement whereby we could insist on grabbing those opportunities and see that together. One of the problems at the moment on corridors, convoy movements, is that the two parties are not sitting together and easily blame each other when it goes wrong. And there are many of us who would have opinions as to who might be to blame for one particular case. But if you don't have that kind of accountability, we know this from Syria, we know this from Yemen in particular, then it doesn't work. You need to have that. So I wanted to lay out the brief. On your second question, I think it is quite a challenge, because what it means is it's another reminder of how volatile and viral this particular war is in terms of humanitarian programming and planning. We have it is over 1,300 UN humanitarian staff in Ukraine now. They're all over the east as well as the west. And now they need to adapt to places that might be recovered for people to go back to. Irpin, Chernihiv, up in the northeast. They need repair, the ICRC example. They need reconstruction. They need it quickly. And as the Prime Minister said, they probably need temporary accommodation pending a reconstruction of their buildings. And they need to encourage people, if they do come back, to be safe. I was, like many people, watching the CNN interview, I'm sure, with President Zelensky yesterday, in which he said, I call on my Ukrainian compatriots not to come back until we're safe and ready for them. And I think this is really an important new challenge, both for the government, but also for the humanitarian agencies. We need to adapt. Cash is still the principal means of delivery of aid to individuals. And the Prime Minister said to me, please combine with us, with the government programs for cash delivery, for example, to the IDPs, of whom there are 6 million, as you know, around the country. Getting cash to them individually, partly through local NGOs, is a priority. And we have now joined with the government in that program. They have significant resources provided from outside the country, and we also try to match that with our own.
Thank you. Frank Cucciardo, TRT.
Thank you for having this press conference. Good luck on your trip. I want to go back to two things. First of all, what role going... Is that better for you? Yeah, okay. What role do you see that Turkey will play going forward in the negotiations? And you were also said you were negotiating ceasefires all your life. Do you really see any will on your behalf of the Russians to agree to any kind of a pause or ceasefire?
I'm really impressed by the role that Turkey is playing. And I speak as a former conflict mediator, as you know, including in Turkey, in fact. And I'm really impressed by the way Turkey has been able to present itself to both sides as a genuinely valuable and useful host to those talks, with all the difficulties, and we saw it since in this last week or so, given what's been happening north of Kyiv, with all the difficulties that involves. And Turkey's, I think, wisdom has really been considerable in the way in which they've hosted those talks. And I'm hoping that we can have Turkey to host what I called a humanitarian contact group, also specifically on humanitarian issues. I'm hoping that will happen. As I say, the Ukrainians have agreed to that. I hope the Russians will too. So I think Turkey is a very, very important aspect of this. There isn't, in classical mediation terms, there isn't a mediation really going on between the Russians and the Ukrainians in the way that you and I understand mediation. But the Turks come closest to it, I think, of all member states. And of course, it's important to them, and that's why they're doing so well, and that's why the Secretary General had this detailed discussion yesterday, as you know, with President Erdogan, and that's not the first time he's had that. And I'll be following up to see, on the basis of that call, is there any way in which the United Nations can contribute, perhaps with Turkey or in any other way, to that process, that vital talks process that may be slightly stumbling at the moment, but is certainly got to be where we put our hopes for the future. On ceasefires, well, you know, who would have thought that Yemen would have suddenly, it's a great example, isn't it, of suddenly the world turns, and where we were really anxiously looking at Yemen these days, and then all of a sudden we had this change of the political leadership of the recognized government, and then the ceasefire and the hopes for a future. Let me tell you what I think about this in terms of Ukraine. First of all, and I know this from elsewhere, you have to be ready, which is what I've been saying. You have to be ready. That's us. We have to be ready. We have to be ready knowing the places, knowing the people, knowing the opportunities, and knowing the pitfalls. Secondly, ceasefires they're not on the horizon right now, but they may be in a couple of weeks. They may be a little bit longer than that. And it will all depend on two things. The war, of course, where that's going. Your guess is as good as mine. And the talks. Because I'm absolutely sure that it's only on the basis of some minimum confidence building that might come out of those talks, and I'm being hopeful here, as opposed to objective, that you will see the beginning of the Russian Federation turning its eyes on potential ceasefires. So we need to watch the talks very, very carefully, and hence the trip to Turkey this week.
Thank you. Joe Klein?
Yes, thank you. It's Joseph Klein from Canada Free Press. Just want to ask a follow-up on the question and then a related question. Given President Putin's recent declaration that he believes that any negotiations are at a dead end, particularly following the sinking of their flagship warship.
The Belgrano.
Yes, yeah. Yes. And also, given the devastation you personally witnessed in Bucha that was wrought by Russia, do you really think there's any realistic chance that Russia will, in good faith, negotiate and implement a durable ceasefire? And in addition to the role that Turkey is playing, do you think it would be time for the Secretary General himself to get more personally involved and try to bring together, perhaps using his own good offices for mediation, President Zelensky and President Putin, either virtually or at an actual meeting? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I remember when I started doing the Yemen mediation in the first briefing of the Security Council, I referred to hope is the currency of the mediator. Because in every war that I've had anything to do with, you always, always begin from a basis of no hope, because it looks so appalling. The atrocities are so terrible. Ukraine is if anything, worse than others. And you keep going, trying, mediating. This is not my job now, but you keep trying to bring those parties together, as is happening. I know that both sides, the delegations of both sides, are still working on the issues that they want to eventually get to discuss around the table. And you keep on doing it because, frankly, what's the alternative? What is the alternative? I was asked by a journalist when I was in Ukraine the other day, who said, but, you know, look at Russia. It's not coming to the table for humanitarian things. Shouldn't you stop? I said, stop? How do you mean stop? How can you expect any humanitarian organization to stop trying to do what it's mandated to do? And I would say that there's the same imperative for those who are trying to resolve the conflict. It's not up to people like me to know whether the prospects are likely to come soon or late, but not to keep at it. That would be irresponsible. On your second point, I think perhaps you'd ask the Secretary General or his spokesman that. But I'm absolutely sure that one of the reasons why I'm going to Turkey is to look into ways in which the United Nations can support the efforts that the Turks are making with the parties. And I talked quite a bit, both in Kyiv and separately in Moscow, to the parties about those talks. And they too put quite a lot of, they put a lot of weight on them. And of course, when atrocities happen, I've had this happen in my life, when atrocities happen, you can't just keep on going on business as usual, but you need to get back to the table at some point, and I hope it's sooner rather than later.
Thank you. Philippe Rater, AFP.
Thank you. Thank you for the briefing. When you were in Moscow, did you try to see Mr. Putin? And you don't have any answer from Russian. It's more than 1 week now. Do you plan to go back to Moscow? And if you can tell us just the day where you are going to Turkey.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
No, I reckon President Putin is probably above my pay grade. So I was very happy to have very extensive meetings with Foreign Minister Lavrov and his team, as well as General Fomin. But I do want to go back, of course. And one of the points that was made to me by the Russian Foreign Ministry was this is round one of my small role, the UN's small role in this conflict in terms of this assignment. And you need to come back. And I do think so. And I want to do this after having gone to Turkey and understood better the way in which Turkey sees the war. Can I add one thing before coming to your about Turkey? I hope to go there on Wednesday, Thursday of this week, leave here Tuesday night, tomorrow night. And Turkey is also, as you know, involved in trying to get people out of Mariupol. They've had this naval effort, this naval corridor, which to bring, I think, 800 people out of Mariupol. And it's evidence of Turkey's sort of interest in the area. And one of the things that I was speaking this morning to David Beasley, the executive director of the World Food Programme, who was telling me that, of course, let's be very clear, keeping Odessa's port open for the export of grain is, if anything, it's of the highest importance, of course, globally. I'll be going to the Horn of Africa in May because of the appalling drought that we see there that has been pushed off, of course, the news by the European crisis. Keeping Odessa's lifeline to the world of the silos that are full in Odessa port, the ships that can't go because of the mining, that's an extraordinarily important issue. And it's one we'll be discussing with the Secretary General today. And David Beasley, of course, is also seeing that as a way of trying to engage, buy Ukrainian grain through World Food Programme, deliver it around the world where it's needed at a price which is presumably a humanitarian price. And that also helps to put liquidity back into Ukraine itself. I cannot think, apart from the specific life-saving humanitarian needs of the Ukrainian people, of a more important issue than that. Odessa port as the lifeline for Ukraine and the way in which it's essential to Ukraine's economic future is, I think, something which is beginning to come through now.
Thank you. Abdallah Al-Arabi.
Thank you for this briefing. Just a follow-up on the Mariupol situation. How do you describe the situation there? And also, is there any alternative ways or any actions from your side to solve this situation?
I didn't go to Mariupol, so you know it as much as I do. It's a place, I've described it as a center of hell. Other people have been more vivid about it. There are upwards of 100,000 or more. We don't really know the numbers. President Zelensky referred to that in his interview with Jake Tapper yesterday. We don't really know the numbers of the people still caught and blocked and unable to get out from Mariupol. And you would think that the safe evacuation of civilians is something that both sides can agree to, and all sides can agree to, and the world can agree to. And ICRC, as you know, has made daily efforts to do that. But it's always, one side or the other to blame. And of course, it's the middle of a very hot battle. And it sounds to me like when the battle is over, and if we can help most of those remaining people out and to safety and to have a future with their families, Mariupol itself is going to be a shocking sight for all of us. It's going to be a shocking sight in terms of the smashing of the city, and it's going to be a shocking sight in terms of what we may find out happened there. I had one very simple, practical suggestion, which is a marginal suggestion, frankly, in the context of this picture. And I mentioned it earlier. I said, if you want to have corridors coming out of Mariupol with any likelihood of safe passage, you've got to extend the time. And by the way, in the Donbass, there is an experience over the last 8 years of what they call windows of silence, as you know. Periods when the battle stopped to allow people to move across or get supplies or get dead bodies back to their families and so forth. Windows of silence. They even have the term for it. And that experience has not been replicated in Mariupol. What's happened is that by day, we have another offer of humanitarian corridor, not clearly cleared with the other side. And you would not be forgiven if you were one of those deciding whether to run today or not for taking a second thought. There's no doubt that we are failing the people of Mariupol.
Thank you. Jennifer Peltz, AP, and then we'll take two last questions online.
Thanks very much. I guess I'd ask, given all this, what do you think your next steps need to be, and or the next steps of anybody else?
Can I do this second one, really?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, but I think we should, we're going through a period of religious festivals this week, last weekend, next weekend, Ramadan, Passover, Orthodox Easter, Christian, Catholic Easter. We should pray for the parties to understand the devastation that is happening as a result of the invasion of Ukraine. And we should ask the parties, as they have been asked, and as one of them, Ukraine, has said yes, to get back to that table in Istanbul, to continue that essential negotiation, even if the war aims are still not clear. A lot of people said this to me on my visits. Even if the eventual war aims may be unrealized or unclear, we certainly need that to happen. On the humanitarian side, we need to have much, much more willing acceptance, primarily of the Russian Federation, to allow convoys in and convoys out in these places of great need. And we need, in those places where the war has for the moment moved on, to provide urgent, emergency, if you like, humanitarian assistance to get people to be able to see their homes again and maybe reach them. And then we need accountability for all that is happening today as well as yesterday. And of course, I saw some of that. An accountability which is going to be so important. And I think that's just the beginning of the story, because, as you know, I think the legacy of this war is one that outstrips wars elsewhere, potentially. The legacy of the upsetting of international order, the criticisms of the UN and the Security Council, for example, the legacy of disaffection between peoples, between the West and the East and the South and the North. This is something which, as each week goes by, is becoming more difficult. I heard a lot about that when I was in Moscow, by the way, not from the government, but from other people I met. This is a generational problem that we're going to have to face, and it's going to be really, really difficult. So for now, let's get aid to people where they need it. The Ukrainian government is an enormously beneficial partner in this, by the way. They are really good people to work with. Let's pray that the people go back to the talks, and let's pray that there's some sense comes back to the minds of decision makers. That's small mercies.
Thank you. Margaret Bashir, Voice of America. Maggie, are you online?
I am here. Thanks, Steph. Thanks, Mr. Griffith. Thanks for all your hard work on this, as always. My question is, so we're hearing, of course, that the battle for the East, for the Donbass, is really going to be stepped up now in the coming days. And what has OCHA done to pre-position any aid? Is that even possible in the situation that's on the ground? How's your contingency planning going for this? And if you could just tell us very briefly, we've of course heard about the wheat situation, but overall, how is the war in Ukraine affecting OCHA's ability to serve other vulnerable communities around the world? Thank you.
I have my 4 points.
Excellent.
Okay, let me do a crisp answer to the second one in a minute. But the first one, I think, is really, really important. We have been, we have a forward operating base, to use that term, in Dnipro, in the southeast of Ukraine, and it serves to provide convoy movements, whether to Mariupol, if we should get so lucky, through Zaporizhzhia, whether to Donetsk and Luhansk, whether to Kherson, and whether to Sumy, where we have succeeded. We have not been able to get a convoy through to Donetsk directly, which would go across the line of battle. And we got to Severodonetsk. I'm sorry, my pronunciation is going to be bad. And there has been distribution from there into the Donbass, including from incredibly unsung heroes, by the way, who are, of course, as usual, the Ukrainian NGOs who go where others don't or can't. So OCHA has been pushing into the southeast towards the Donbass with supplies. And we have staff, by the way, across the Donbass, both in the non-government controlled areas and in the government controlled areas, who've been there in hiding since the beginning of the war. And so we've been pre-positioning stocks in there, but it's not enough. We've been doing the same in Odessa, by the way, because of course we're all worried about what the war may come to Odessa. And we've been trying to get stuff into Kherson, which is on the, on the route between Mariupol and ultimately Odessa through Mykolaiv. So we, to the extent possible, we're pre-positioning. WFP, of course, is very much in the fore on all this. But also cash. The great advantage of cash is you don't need to move it. You send it through the internet. And there are still parts of the southeast where cash can still be a useful way of enabling people to buy food or to buy their needs. So that, again, is happening. But the Donbass is enormously worrying, and I'm glad you asked the question. It is the center of gravity of the war, of course. There's been a lot of discussion about whether it would be wise to bring UN assistance through Russian territory into the Donbass. It's a very complicated process. We talked a lot about that in Moscow. We have a duty of care to our staff, which is in addition to our humanitarian responsibilities, to see that they are okay, that they're surviving. But our priority right now, and you will see plans to do this in the next couple of days, is to get a convoy through into Donetsk and to supply from there into Luhansk and into those different areas. And then to stay and to have our colleagues there, and it's not just the UN who has staff there. The NGOs do, the ICRC does, other organizations do too, do the work that they want to do and bravely have never stopped doing. So the Donbass is a massive, massive humanitarian worry.
Thank you. Pam, sorry.
4 quick points.
Yes,
on
please,
the, because the humanitarian impacts of the Ukrainian war outside Ukraine, and we have 4 points, which is it increases the numbers of people in need due to the price of fuel and food and grain and so forth. So WFP says up to 47 million more people will probably become in need of humanitarian assistance globally. That's on top of the 200 million. So that's, whatever the word, that's another quarter, 25% increase of people in need around the world. Number 2, new crises. We see what's happening in Sri Lanka. There were early demonstrations in Iraq, I remember, early on after the war had started. Instability due to prices and so forth is very worrying. We don't know where that's going, but it's a concern. Our operations are more expensive. I think WFP said that in Yemen, I launched an appeal on Yemen, as you may know, some time ago, a few weeks ago. It would increase the cost, the food cost in Yemen for the WFP alone of $10 million a month, $120 million for the year. And finally, the possibility that funding for other crises is squeezed by virtue of money going to the Ukraine. And I want to say one thing on that, Stefan, is so far we have not seen any evidence of that. So far, the commitments of donors to our crisis, Afghanistan the other day, Yemen before, Syria will be in a week or two in Brussels, has not diminished. We still got some donors that we like to see more from, but Western donors who give a lot of money to Ukraine are not diminishing their generosity to the rest of the world, not yet. But we worry, of course, that we may get there. Thank you.
Thank you. Pam Falk, CBS News. Pam?
Thank you very much, Mr. Griffiths. You can hear me?
I can.
All right. Thank you very much for the briefing. My question is about your statement that so many Ukrainians are returning, 30,000 a day. The OCHA recent report, 870,000 since the war began. And as President Zelensky, there is some sound on the line, but President Zelensky is encouraging people not to come back yet. Where do you think the push, if you will, people won't go back unless some of the countries or the agencies or someone is saying it's okay, unless it's sui generis and they're just making their way back. What do you think should be done, and what is actually encouraging them? Thank you so much.
Well, that's a very good question. It's a question both for Antonio Vitorino of IOM and, of course, Filippo Grandi of UNHCR. As you know, we believe in safe and voluntary return, no pressure. And it was striking, as you say, what President Zelensky had to say about this yesterday. It was very sensible and very striking. Don't rush home. There's still trouble to be ahead, and there's places to be repaired. The 870,000 figure since the beginning of the war, I gather, I have it here, is the figure from the border guards, compiling them coming in. It's not a UN figure. It's a figure from the Ukrainian border guards as people come back. And I think what it means is, of course, is that people want to go home. And they see that the war may have stopped. It's a huge question. We discuss it with a lot of people in Kyiv. Has the war stopped for good, or will it come back? You know that insanity. But people want to go home, and people everywhere want to go home if they get the chance. And most Ukrainian refugees are still in the region due to the incredible generosity of the regional neighbors. And so they want to go back. And I think it's difficult for anybody to stand in their way. If they want to go back, they should have the right to do so. But that means that we need to be ready with at least a minimum of assistance to smooth their way. There are many, many IDPs already, 6 million or more, as I said earlier, already in Ukraine, spread around the country. This will add this number to those internally displaced. We support individual families of IDPs with cash, and that is something which we're doing, as I was mentioning earlier, with the government. So these people coming back will have that assistance, but they also need their housing back, and they need their services back.
Thank you, Martin. If we could squeeze one last question from you, or an answer rather. We'll go to Iftikhar Alif, Associated Press of Pakistan. Iftikhar, are you on the line?
Thanks, Steph. Mr. Griffiths, thank you for the briefing. Might been partly answered. I'll still try to ask you the same question I intended. If the situation, if the war situation in the Ukraine dramatically change, as you cited the example of Yemen, is the United Nations ready and has enough resources to take care of millions of Ukrainians coming back to their country?
Well, we should be so lucky, right? I mean, this would be a miracle if that happens, and we know these are the weeks for miracles. But the United Nations has significant, I mean, not just the UN, the international humanitarian community has very significant numbers of people in the region, of course, under the leadership of UNHCR, supporting those refugees who've got out of Ukraine. Inside, I was telling you that we have 1,300 UN staff, humanitarian staff, across Ukraine. It's always difficult to scale up in crises, and Ukraine was no different. You remember we started the humanitarian response in this war in a situation where many people were saying it's not going to be a war until it started. So there was a certain amount of political pressure not to think in the worst terms of what in fact did actually happen. So we did a certain amount of planning because we did fear the worst, and many governments were telling us this. But to get the good people in and get them out to the east where their lives are in danger because you're close to the people you serve, that's been the task of the last weeks. And now, I mean, OCHA alone, let me give you from my office, we put about 70 of our best people from all over the world into Ukraine, surged them in, and they're already beginning to rotate to go back to where they have other work. So I don't know if we're going to be ready for a dramatic miracle, but we'll be a lot readier than we were for the other, which was for the war, which I think took us all, shocked us all in its gravity, in its suddenness, and in its terrible aspirations. Let's hope we do get the chance to be ready. Thank you.
Martin, thank you very much, and thanks for coming, and we hope to see you back here soon after your next round of travels.
Thanks very much, Stefan. Thank you all. Is this mine? Oh, yeah. Good. Thank you.
Oh, you can go this way.
Yeah.
Cheers, thanks.